There was a time when the stars whispered of peace, when guardians in robes stood between darkness and light, when the hum of a lightsaber meant safety, not fear, when wisdom echoed through marble halls and silence was a choice, not a sentence, when the galaxy still believed in something greater than survival. But belief fades fast, in a storm of betrayal. One order, one lie, one flick of a wrist, and it all fell. The temple crumbled into ash, the chosen became hunted, and the protectors of peace were branded enemies of it. There are scars carved into time that never heal, and the Jedi left more than a few. Still there is beauty in what they once were. A light that flickered across 1,000 worlds. A creed not built on conquest, but balance. A bond that tied strangers through the Force itself. Their failure wasn't their end, it was their warning. And sometimes, warnings come wrapped in legend. We speak their names in reverence now. Yoda, Kenobi, Windu. We study their ruins as if they hold the truth. We trace the symbols etched in stone, and hope they whisper wisdom back. But the Force doesn't live in walls. It lives in choice, in change, in memory. And yet, what if they never fell? What if the purge was stopped? What if the Jedi Order endured? Would the galaxy be brighter? Or would it still rot from within? Would Anakin still rise? Or would balance have found another way? Would power still corrupt? Or would peace finally hold? In this video, we explored the galaxy that could have been. A Star Wars built not on loss, but on survival. We ask if the Jedi's presence would have saved everything, or doomed it differently. We dive into a future never lived, a story never told, and the possibilities buried beneath the ashes of destiny. What if the Jedi never fell? What if the temple still stood tall above Coruscant's skyline? What if lightsabers hummed through marble halls, not as weapons of war, but as instruments of peace? What would it look like if the guardians of the galaxy had never been broken? Would the Force itself feel different in a world where balance was never shattered? Imagine a galaxy untouched by Order 66. Imagine Padawans still training under twin moons. Imagine Yoda meditating beside the next generation. Imagine knowledge being passed down instead of hunted into extinction. Imagine the Jedi archives still holding the secrets of the stars, waiting to be explored. Would Anakin still have turned? Would Palpatine still have found cracks to crawl through? Would the Sith have remained shadows instead of emperors? Would democracy have survived longer under the Jedi's gaze? Or would something darker have festered in the comfort of their control? It's tempting to think peace would have lasted, that the Clone Wars never would have begun, that countless lives wouldn't have burned in battles forged by deception. But perfection rarely holds, and the Jedi were never perfect. Still, there's something beautiful about a world where they endured, where they adapted instead of crumbling, where their robes still walked among the stars, where their wisdom echoed longer than their silence ever did. But maybe they didn't deserve to survive. Maybe the fall was earned. Maybe their arrogance made collapse inevitable. Maybe holding the galaxy's fate in their hands made them blind to their own cracks. Maybe they weren't guardians, just gatekeepers. They let the darkness grow in plain sight. They watched a Sith rise to power beneath their feet. They let politics choke the purity of their purpose. They turned prophecy into control. They traded balance for bureaucracy. They trained children to feel nothing, to sever emotion in the name of peace, to suppress fear and love instead of understanding them. They made compassion a rule, not a truth. And in doing so, they bred shadows in the hearts of the gifted. Anakin wasn't a mistake. He was a symptom, a reflection of a system that never knew how to heal. They feared attachment but clung to tradition. They feared passion but wielded power. They feared change but embraced authority. So maybe the galaxy didn't lose saviors. Maybe it shed an institution that lost itself. Maybe the Jedi's destruction was the only way for anything new to grow. And maybe that truth is harder to accept than any fall. If the Jedi still stood, would we have Leia's grief? Would Luke have ever looked into twin suns and dreamed of more? Would Obi-Wan have become a ghost, watching over the broken? Would Ahsoka have wandered the galaxy without a name? Would the pain that shaped them still echo across generations? The fall carved scars into the stars. It left children without fathers, friends without faith, hope without direction. The silence after their purge was deafening, a void that no victory could ever fill. Padme's tears still stain the ashes of Mustafar. Mace Windu's fury still fades into the void of betrayal. Kanan's sacrifice still flickers in the heart of rebellion. Every Jedi lost became a memory sharpened by absence, a presence felt only through the weight of what never was. The clones who fired, the masters who fell, the temples that crumbled, none of it vanished. It lingered in every story told in hushed tones, in every child who dreamed of a saber they'd never hold, in every whisper of the Force that carried grief instead of guidance. Their survival might have spared that sorrow, but maybe it's the sorrow that taught the galaxy to remember them, not as gods, not as rulers, but as people who tried, and failed, and mattered. Still, imagine them now. Imagine a temple reborn, bathed in starlight, breathing wisdom again. Imagine sabers igniting in harmony, not in war, but in ceremony. Imagine voices chanting the code, not in rigidity, but reverence. Picture Ahsoka leading a new council, not of masters, but of mentors. Picture Grogu walking among them, the Force pulsing gently in his small hands. Picture peacekeepers who know failure, and rise wiser from it. Picture Jedi who balance strength and vulnerability. Imagine distant systems where Jedi help rebuild instead of rule, where their presence means healing, not fear, where diplomacy blooms under their protection, where planets welcome them, not as enforcers, but as allies. The Force would hum differently. It would sing through them, not around them. It would be alive, responsive, whole, not bound by dogma, not severed by sorrow, but flowing freely through lives that understand what it truly means to feel. In that vision, they are more than what they were. They are better, and the galaxy breathes easier because of it. A galaxy not led by Jedi, but lifted by them. What if that future still lives? What if the Jedi can return, not as they were, but as they should be? What if the Force never left them, only waited? What if the spark survived, hidden in stories, waiting for belief? Hope doesn't always roar. Sometimes it flickers in forgotten places. Sometimes it stirs in the smallest of hearts. Sometimes it begins with a single child, finding a lightsaber buried in dust, and lighting it for the first time. It's in Rey lifting stones, in Cal standing his ground, in survivors who chose to rebuild instead of hide. It's in whispers carried by rebels, in temples rebuilt by hand, in teachings reimagined by those brave enough to evolve. The Jedi may have been shattered, but shards still glow, scattered across the stars, waiting to be gathered, waiting to be reforged into something more resilient, something more human, something more alive. And maybe that's the destiny of the Jedi, not to dominate, but to endure, not to return unchanged, but to rise transformed. Through pain, through reflection, through hope. Yet even in dreams of survival, there's a haunting truth, that if the Jedi had never fallen, the galaxy might never have learned that in their destruction, a lesson was carved into history, a warning and a whisper. Peace without humility breeds arrogance. Power without self-awareness breeds blindness. Legacy without growth becomes a cage. The Jedi forgot that truth, and the galaxy paid for it, in blood, in silence, in ash. But from that tragedy came transformation. The Force found new voices, new vessels, new ways to be understood. The galaxy became its own guardian, and in that evolution, the Jedi's meaning became clearer than ever before. They were never meant to last forever. They were meant to guide, to protect, and then to pass the torch. To trust the future they helped shape. To let go, so something greater could rise. So what if the Jedi were never destroyed? Maybe they were, but maybe their purpose wasn't. Maybe they still live, not in temples, but in every soul that dares to do what's right, even when no one is watching.